In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how to rough out the rest of the remainder of the project. So basically blocking out all the different shapes that we're going to need. We're going to need the ground mound, and then we're going to need some additional shapes for some stonework that's on the ground around here, like this. And then eventually we will get to the point where we're going to make the individual grass blades that populate the ground. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to tackle is adding 3 larger stones along the basin of the project here. So that's going to be pretty easy. We'll just use this method that we talked about before in the previous video where we can hit append and then we can just append a cube 3D. Sorry, I went a little bit too fast. So if you're not careful with that interface, it disappears on you pretty quickly. So just kind of move kind of slowly over here and then you can click the Polymesh 3D cube. I'm going to take the movement, the gizmo tool, move, scale, and rotate. So actually when you're on the gizmo tool, it's going to give you the options to use all the different move, scale, and rotate all at the same time. So I'm going to give myself something that looks about like this in here. So I'm gonna make my first stone. And what I'm going to do at this point, after we've got the rough shape of this, let's just rename it real quick. Let's call this stone side 01. The name doesn't really matter. It's just up to you what you want to use. So we've got a lot of different things that at our disposal. Probably the best brush to use is the move brush at the very beginning stages for roughing out a shape. And this is just manipulating your large forms. And that mesh that we just pulled in is got quite a bit of geometry to it. So we can move it, we can hold down shift and start to smooth this out just a little bit. So I want to kind of keep the original shape to the best of my ability. I want it a little bit smaller on the top, so we can I'm just lightly holding down shift and tapping with the Wacom tablet that I've got, and that should just taper this thing. So it's just very lightly tapping on the model to get this shape. When you have lower amounts of geometry, the brushes are going to have a heavier effect, especially for smoothing. So if we put on something like the standard brush, I'm going to turn off lazy mouse. You can see if I push on there, it's going to raise the surface really quickly. But if we just kind of lightly tap on the model, we can get that shape kind of going for that. So the next thing I could do is just turn this into Dynamesh pretty quickly, because we can start sculpting on this immediately, but I just want to get this rough shape like this, and then we can go to geometry, open that up, then we're going to go to Dynamesh, and then we'll give a resolution. Let's try 500 to start off with, and then click Dynamesh. And you can see that's fairly dense. That might be just a little bit too dense, so let's go 400 and then click Dynamesh, and I think that should be pretty good. Now it's going to try to retain the shape that we were just using, and so that's why it kind of looks faceted like this. It's pretty easy at this stage to just hold down shift and then kind of smooth out the results. And then so now we've got a mesh that's in this Dynamesh mode, and we can sculpt on it, and we don't really have to worry about topology or stretching. So anytime you stretch the model too far, you can hold down control and then remesh, and you can see how that made new topology. So I can drag this out pretty far like this. And this is the problem where you'll get stretching in the polygons. So imagine we were sculpting on this. You can see we can get a nice line in through here on here, but if we go to sculpt in that area, it's not going to work. So that's why whenever we hold down control and then remesh, that gives us a brand new mesh to work with. I accidentally kind of really pulled this out, so that's why it's tearing the geometry up so horribly on that. But let me go back here like this, and then I can just remesh at this point, and you can see now I've got nice ability to sculpt all the way through all that stuff. So that's the advantage of doing the Dynamesh and then being able to remesh like what we're doing. Next, I'll use this trim dynamic, and this one's really good for whatever your brush goes along the surface. If you just push down on the brush, you can kind of chip away at the surface. So we'll look at this a little bit later for doing medium level detail and making chips and everything on the edges of our model. But right now we can do this to make some really nice kind of larger forms in some of these rock structures that we're making. And you can take your brush size down. That's gonna matter for you. You know, like what that stroke's gonna look like. So um, brush size is gonna have a huge effect for this. So I'm not gonna get too detailed with this. I'm gonna go back to the move brush now. So I'll just can use a combination of move brush and maybe a little bit of trim dynamic like this. So let's keep this as our first stone. Now we can just duplicate this, and we got our side stone 2, and I can move this. If I want to move it based off of camera space, I can grab these corners like this. Now if I just want to move it on one axis like this, I can move it along with these, and maybe it'll rotate this one a little bit. And what I originally had in the design that I showed you guys at the beginning, this was a bit more flat at here. This is where solo comes in nice and handy. So like I can just start working with just this. I've got my brush size fairly large, so I'm going to try to just square this thing off quite a bit. And I'm going to go to the back side, square this off, side, square this off, and keep working on these guys. I'm going to take my brush size down just a little bit more. Keep squaring this off. Just working my way around the model. And again, we can always use the move brush. So I know I'm whipping the camera around kind of quickly on there, and if we ever get to this weird spot where you want to straighten up the camera, just rotate and hold down shift, and that will snap to one of the views, like a front, side, back. So I can take the move brush and I can kind of start working with these shapes to get this to be a bit more square. And as I work with this, we're eventually going to have to bring back the other models so we can see the changes that we made, and if that works well with the other models that are around it. Like this. And again, I'm going to go back to the this trim, and then just kind of square this up a bit. There we go. So I think that's getting pretty good. I'll hit Alt S. That's the hotkey that I made for the solo. And then let's just take a look at this and make sure we're not intersecting. I'll put it on the gizmo tool. We'll move it out right about here. And if we wanted to do something interesting with the shape, we can kind of maybe put it at a slight angle like this. And then we'll go ahead and duplicate this. So we'll go ahead and duplicate this one. So we got the third one, and then we can move that into position. I think I made it a little bit larger, kind of pushed it over here like this. And then if you rotate, if you hold down shift, you can snap to degree increments of 5 degrees. And then with this, see, we can take this and we can scale it in these different dimensions. So that's pretty nice. So there's no perfect position that you need to do for these pieces. It's really up to you artistically what you want to create. I'm going to move these up down. You can see how we are down below this pillar, and we set the floor at the 0, 0 mark with inside a ZBrush. So I'm just going to move all this up and try to make sure that I don't have any pieces that dip down below. So if I hold down shift and rotate the camera to like a front view, so I'm just rotating towards the front view and then hold down shift and it'll snap. And if I tap P, then we can see kind of where we're at with everything at that point with our pillar. I think I might have another pillar that's hidden and it's down below, so that's why that's going there like that. So I'm just gonna take this pillar and I'm going to raise it up like that, and you can see the floor snaps to that at that point. I just have multiple pillars in here from the different stuff I've been showing you guys in the video content, so I'm just kind of leaving that stuff sit and leaving it around. The next thing I'm going to do is add a ground plane, so we'll add a plane down below, and then we can kind of sculpt on that. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit append again like what we did before, and then there's a plane 3D. Let's go ahead and click that. Now we can rename this and just call this floor, and then we'll put it in the gizmo tool. We can choose whatever you want: move, scale, rotate. It doesn't really matter. But I'm going to take this and rotate this into place. And so remember, if we start rotating and hold down Shift, we can snap the degree increments on that. So I'll tap P, and let's see where this thing actually ends up being for this. So I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to go right here to the front. We have perspective turned off, and then just try to get this right here. So I think that should be pretty good. I'll tap P for this. And then I'm going to turn polyframe on just so I can see the geometry. I'll put it back on the sculpting tool. One thing I could do is this. I could hold down Control, and this will allow us to paint a mask in here for this. So let's just say I want to raise up this part. And if I hold down Control and click, I can do the inverse of that. And so basically it's masking all this portion right here. And then now I could use the gizmo tool, and I could move this up. I could use the standard brush, and we could sculpt certain areas up. Again, I'm turning off that lazy mouse that we've got down here. And lazy mouse actually exists under stroke, and then if you go to lazy mouse, you can see these are all the buttons that I've moved down to here on the custom interface on here. With this piece of geometry, we're going to look at how we can do this thing called subdivision levels. So we've been using Dynamesh, and that's a way that you can keep things topology independent, and you just remesh it at any time. But it's possible that we can add subdivision levels to our model. So if we go under geometry and we click divide, it'll basically take every single quad that you see and divide it into 4 faces. And so if I add another one, you can see if I turn the polyframe on, turn it back on, you can see how we're getting more geometry every time we do this. And I'll do it one more time. And so we've got a pretty good amount of geometry that we're looking at. And then now with this, I'll use something like the clay tubes, and we can kind of just roughly sculpt in some land mass in through here. Maybe pull some areas up. If you hold down Alt, we can dig into the surface a little bit. So this is not a big deal at this point to kind of rough everything in. You're just kind of a little bit more gestural with the things that you're making. And I'm just either holding down Alt to dig away and then pulling some of this stuff up. And I'm leaving the polyframe on here so you guys can just see what's happening. So the interesting thing is you can sculpt at different levels with subdivision levels. You can work at this level and you got this kind of amount of detail. But if you need to use operations where you can maybe do larger forms and then move larger shapes, you have the ability to work at a lower subdivision level. And then whatever details that are on the higher one, if you push it back up to the higher one, it actually moves the higher subdivision levels. So it's kind of a nice workflow at times. And if you spin your camera around, you can see it drops it down to the lower level. So it does help for performance as well, if you've got a lot of models that are pretty heavy within here. So I'm just going to click this clay polish on this real quick, and you can see what that kind of does and kind of stylizes, and it's basically like almost like a filter system within here, and that's pretty nice to have. If I hold down Shift, we can smooth some of this stuff back out again. And so again, it's going to be up to you what you're going to kind of sculpt, but I'm just doing something that I would consider a fairly simple kind of mound structures like this. And I'll hold down Alt with the clay tubes and keep carving some of this out like this. And don't forget we've got trim dynamic that we could flatten some areas out if we wanted. Okay. Now I'm just going to hold down Shift and kind of smooth some of this stuff out. Like this. And if you're using Trim Dynamic, you can also hold down Alt and then click and then build up a surface, but it builds it up and then flattens it at the same time. So say if I wanted to make it feel like there's a rock that's just kind of embedded into the ground there like that, I could do that. I could hold down Alt and then click on this one here again and then just flatten out the corners a bit. So that can be a nice way to build up surfaces at times too. Okay, so you can kind of see how it's tearing up the corners of this thing. So I'm just going to hold down Control and then drag a mask here like this and here. And we can soften a mask by holding down Control and then clicking on any part of a mask that we've already drawn. And that will soften that mask up. If you hold down Control and Alt and click, you can tighten up a mask. So I'm going to just Control click, Control Alt click. I just want to show you that it's possible to do that. I think it's a great feature, and I use it all the time. So if I want to invert the mask, you can hit Control I, or you can hold down Control and just click in the open viewport like that. So what I'm trying to do is just isolate this and mask all this area, and I'm going to go to the deformation area, and they've got this morph to grid. Oops, let's see. Actually, that's going to do that in this other dimension that we've got. So let me show you. We could go back to rotating. I'm going to hold down Shift, and then let's just see if I can do this morph to grid. Yeah, so it's going to morph the whole grid back, but I'm going to mask this out just like we did before, and then inverse, and then just smooth this. And then let's do the morph to grid. So I'll do that. I'll do the inverse of the mask. So just hit Control and then click in here. And then if we put on the gizmo tool, I can just push this out like that. And then I'm going to smooth the mask a little bit more, and then just hold down Shift and then kind of smooth this area out a little bit more, this transition. Like this. So it's not a big deal if these edges are completely flat or not. I'm just kind of showing you how we could work with that to try to get this a little bit more flat on the outer part. And then now I can just rotate this back into place. I'll hold down Shift as I rotate, just like that. Just kind of move it back into position. So I think that will work fairly well for this part. I'm trying to think if I would like for this ground plane to actually be a little bit larger. So I think I'll scale it out just a little bit within through here. Now obviously that changes what we've sculpted, and we'd have to go back through and resculpt this. This is where this is important at this stage where you're making some design decisions. You need to be able to quickly iterate on things and not be afraid to change some of your work if something's not working the way that you want. It's way easier to change things at this stage than if we started sculpting on this and got further down the road with this sculpt and then realized we need to do something like what I just did here. Then you spend a lot of time on that particular area and you're really happy with it, and then you find out you got to make some changes to it. It becomes kind of a painful process, right? And it kind of forces you to go, you know what, is it worth making those changes? And then usually you say no, and then it affects the design, right? And you don't make the best design decisions because of how much work it's going to be to change something. So that's why it's best if you work in these stages where make those big sweeping changes, um, make them at this stage, and then make sure you've got some confidence in your design as you move forward. Now, in the real world, you would probably get some sign off from like an art director or a creative director, somebody that's going to be kind of looking over your work and making sure you're sticking to the vision that the team that you're working on has. Or if you're doing freelance, then whoever the client is, you're going to have to get some kind of sign off on things. But usually try to get sign off at an earlier stage and then show them like these big forms and stuff like that. If you're working with really talented art directors and things like that, they're gonna know the process, and it's gonna be not a big deal to them, and they'll be able to look at something rough and kind of go, okay, this is where it's going. Where it becomes a little bit trickier is if you're doing some freelance work and you're working with people that are not well versed with art. They might get a little bit confused and say this doesn't look very good. So you're going to have to talk them through that process, and you're going to have to tell them that basically this is like a 3D sketch at this stage, and it's not going to look complete, but I'm just giving you something that tells you something about layout, and the quality is going to come up later. So you as an artist, that's going to be part of your job, is talking through for people that don't understand the process, helping them understand what it is that you're showing them, and try to explain to them why it's beneficial for them to look at things at a particular stage, and then get sign off on that, and then move that forward. Okay, so I think I'm gonna be fairly happy with what we got going on here as far as a layout goes. Now, what we could do for the grass blade um, is just at least get the first little blade going. And so if we can duplicate any of these. Now, if I duplicate this one, it's got subdivisions on it. I was going to initialize it and turn it into the geometry like we looked at before, but it might have issues with it having subdivision levels on it. So I'll just take one of these stones and then duplicate that and rename it and call it Grass Blade 01, like that. And then let's just hit solo, and let's go down to the initialize. And if you remember with the Q cube, we could just click that, and let's just take a look at the options that we've got for this. So I want this to be a lot taller, so let's go like something like 12, hit Q cube like this. I know I want to turn it into something that's got like three sides, like the shape, instead of a square going up through here, it's a triangle shape. So we could try the Q cylinder Y, and if we do the resolution on this 1 and 1, let's see what we get here. We get this, which is fine. I think we could also do this with a Q cube. So you could do the cylinder or the cube, either one. Doesn't really matter. And what I would do at this point, we're going to use the Z modeler brush. And you remember, if we hover over an edge, a vert, or a face, we get different operations for this. So I was going to tap on the model just to change the pivot point. If we click anywhere on the model, we can rechange where that pivot point is that we rotate about. So I'm just going to go up here in the corner, right here. Just tap on it so I can reset that. And then what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to see if I can do this. I'm going to go over an edge, hit the space bar, and we're going to click delete and do edge loop complete and see if we can get rid of that. If we do, it makes a flat plane like that, so that's not exactly what I want to do. So it is possible to delete edge loop, so you can see we can do that here. It just doesn't like it because it's on the corner. So let's go over a point and hit the space bar, and let's do stitch. I think stitch will allow us to click one point and then click a second point, and it'll merge those together. Since we don't have too much geo, this will be fairly easy for us to go through and do this in here like this. Okay, and now we've turned that into this triangle shape. And then what I want to do is pull this to a point, so I'm going to click this point here and here like that, and then now we've got basically this shape. And if we turn on dynamic subdivision levels, which is kind of cool, it's basically like subdivision levels where we went and we divided the model. We could do that, and that's fine. Let me redo that. So we can do that, but we can also turn on dynamic subdiv. And if we do that, we turn that on, and it basically does the same thing as adding subdivision levels, but these can be turned on and off. So they work with the Z modeler brush. So you can basically be working with your model at this base cage level and do edits to it, but then you can still have the look and the feel of having subdivision levels on your model. And here's where you control the level of subdivision level. So 0 is base cage, 1 is the first subdivision level, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So you can get a nice, clean looking smooth model like this. I'll turn it off real quick. I think we looked at some creasing options before in the past, but it does exist on the Z modeler. So if we go to our edge and then hold down the spacebar and we say crease, we could crease this edge, and then watch if we turn dynamic subdiv on, see how it creases that edge here. And if we hover our cursor over, it's gonna show us the mesh for the base cage. So if I click this crease, see how it's creasing this. And if I go to this edge right in here, sometimes it's kind of hard to pick this stuff out in this mode, so I'll just turn it off and then click it, and then we can turn this back on, and you can see how nice and clean that shape is. Now if we wanted to hold these edges and through here, watch this. We'll just click on one of these as we move up and then turn on dynamic, and you can see how it's doing a really nice job creasing this within through here like that. And really what that's coming from, if we go to crease and then we go to crease level, we could pull this down to a lower number. And so this means it's only going to crease for the first subdivision level, and then after that it starts to smooth out. And if we do 2, then it's going to hold creasing for 2 subdivision levels and then start to flatten out. Let's just put it on 1. You can see how it kind of rounds out, but it's holding this crisper edge that we've got going on here. And so if we hover our cursor right there and then click, we can do that. I'll go back to dynamic subdiv, turn this off. I'm just going to click all the way up through the model like that and turn it back on. And then we're starting to get the look for our grass blade. So I'm just clicking on some part of the model and tapping F again to frame it like this. Now I want this thing facing straight forward. So I'm just going to click off this builder brush like this. And let's see if we rotate the model. Let's just hold down Alt and click on here, and I'm going to hold down Alt, click this to go to the unmasked center point, and then I'll click Alt and click on that to reset the transform. So if I rotate and hold down Shift, I want to rotate it 45 degrees. So this puts us in this mode now where this thing is nice and symmetrical. And if we tap X on our model, you can see how we're working with symmetry. And so I could use the move brush, and I can kind of grab right in through here on the outer parts and maybe fatten this up a little bit towards the top. And if I go to the side, I can kind of do something like this with the shape. So I'm just altering it slightly, not doing anything too extreme with it. Now I did all that work that I just showed you, but it could be possible for us if we turn off dynamic subdiv. We've looked at a tool like this before where we're using the selection rectangle, and that exists up within here. If we hold on Control and Shift and then click, we can click on the lasso, and if we hold on Control and Shift and just click on this edge, it'll grab it. Sometimes whenever you've got so low of amount of polygons to work with, ZBrush does get a little bit confused. So I'm going to see if I can go on the side here, hold on Control Shift, and then add the Alt modifier to it. And then if you remember, we can make a polygroup, hit Control W like this. I was just trying to get that as a polygroup. So I've got a polygroup here, 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 and on the bottom. And we can go to crease, and we can say crease polygroup. And then now the whole thing's creased. And now if we tap D to do our dynamic subdivision levels, you can see if we turn off the poly frame on here, it's getting some nice creasing. Now maybe we can put this crease level up like to 3, and you can see we're getting really nice crisp edges at that point. And we can put it back on the move tool. We got something like this. Okay, and then let's bring everything back, click off solo. I'll tap F to frame out. And then let's just rotate to the front. Let's go take our grass blade, put it on a move brush. And again, if you hold down Alt and click to the unmasked point, hold down Alt and click on this, this will reset the transform for it. So let's just grab this grass blade, and then I'll turn off symmetry, tap X. That's why it was moving funky on me like that. And we can just push this back and through here and just set it in through here like this. We could scale it if we need to get it smaller or whatever. So I'm not too worried about it right now. I just want to know that I've got at least one blade kind of built, and we can start working with that soon. And so this is what I'm going to use for the template for laying out the rest of this project. I think this will be a pretty good starting point for us for everything that we want to sculpt on here.